Hi, this is Lisa. In this video, I'm going to discuss absolute value. The absolute value of a number x is the distance between 0 and x on the real number line. The absolute value of x is represented by this symbol right here. We're going to look at a couple of numbers and we're going to evaluate the absolute value. The absolute value of negative 22. There are 22 units between 0 and negative 22 on the real number line. The absolute value of negative 22 is 22. Now, the word distance is used here in the definition. And when we talk about distances, we're always talking about positive numbers. So if all you have is the absolute value of a number, you should always come up with a positive value. Nobody says, I am negative 6 feet tall. People usually say, I am 6 feet tall. So we're using positive numbers when we talk about things that we're measuring, like distance. Example number 2. Now in this example, we have a negative outside the absolute value sign. That is going to stay. And then when we evaluate the absolute value of 29, the absolute value of 29 is 29. So our final answer, negative the absolute value of 29, or the opposite of the absolute value of 29 is negative 29. When we evaluate expressions with absolute values, we want to evaluate the inside of the absolute value first, then take the absolute value of the remaining expression. So for example, the absolute value of 8 minus 5, we're going to evaluate what's on the inside first. 8 minus 5 is 3, and the absolute value of 3 is 3. Final answer. Example number 2. Again, we're going to do the absolute value first, so the negative sign on the outside stays, and then the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. So our final answer is negative 4, because this absolute value, that negative sign was on the outside of the absolute value symbol. And the absolute value of 0 divided by 4, first thing I'm going to do is the division that's inside the absolute value. 0 divided by 4 is 0, and the absolute value of 0 is 0. We're going to decide whether the statement is true or false. That should say or false. Example number 1. The absolute value of negative 5 is less than 8. Well, the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, and 5 is less than 8. So this one happens to be true. Absolute value of 4 is greater than or equal to negative the absolute value of 7. Absolute value of 4 is 4. Sorry, absolute value of negative 4 is 4. And we're going to bring our negative down, and then the absolute value of 7 is 7. Yes, 4 is greater than negative 7, so this one is also true. When you want to solve an equation that contains an absolute value, the first thing you need to do is isolate the absolute value on one side of the equation. Write two equations. The first equation will contain the expression on the inside of the absolute value equal to the number on the other side of the equation. For example, absolute value of x minus 3, I drop the absolute value signs and I just get x equals 3. The second equation will contain the expression on the inside of the absolute value sign equal to the opposite of the number. So in this one we have x equals 3, or what was on the inside of the absolute value, x, is equal to the opposite of 3, which is negative 3. Use your equation solving strategies to solve both equations. You will either have no solution or two solutions to your equation. And lastly, check your answers. So example number 1, the absolute value of x equals 10. So we're going to rewrite this. We have two equations. We're going to have x and x, the stuff on the inside of the absolute value, and it's got to be equal to positive 10 or negative 10. And if I'm going to check my answer here, absolute value of 10 is equal to 10. That works. Absolute value of negative 10 is equal to 10. that works. So my solution set are the numbers 10, comma, -10. That's my final answer. We'll do a few more examples here. The absolute value of x equals -6. Well, we just said the absolute value has got to be a distance between 0 and that number, and the distance can never be equal to a negative. So this one has no solution. Our absolute value cannot be equal to a negative number. Can the absolute value of x ever be equal to 0? Is the distance between x and 0 ever equal to 0? And the answer is yes, but only when x is equal to 0. So those are two kind of special cases. The next one, we're going to go through that process of solving our equation. We said take the stuff on the inside of the absolute value, so x minus 7, and we're going to create our two equations, right, 1 and 2, and we said it's got to be equal to the number, in this case 8, and the opposite of that number, -8. Now we have two equations that we can solve. X minus 7, I want to add 7 to both sides of the equation. So I get x equals 15. And solve the second equation, we're going to add 7 to both sides of the equation, and we get x equals -1. Now I want to go back and check both of these in my original equation. The absolute value of x minus 7 equals 8. If I plug 15 in, does that make my equation true? Absolute value of 15 minus 7. 15 minus 7 is 8, and the absolute value of 8 is 8. That works. And if I do the absolute value of -1 minus 7, I get -1 minus 7 is -8, and the absolute value of -8 is 8. So -1 works as well. Our solution set is a set of 1, comma, 15. Sorry, -1, comma, 15. Final answer. Example number 5 says the absolute value of x plus 3 equals -1. Now we just said a few minutes ago the absolute value cannot be a negative, so this one has no solution. In example number 6, the first thing we need to do is isolate our absolute value. So on this one, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides of the equation, so that my absolute value of x minus 2 is on one side of the equation by itself. And 13 minus 4 is 9. Now I can create my two equations. Stuff on the inside of the absolute value is x minus 2. So we're going to write that down twice. And the number on the other side is 9. So we're going to have x minus 2 equals 9, and x minus 2 equals -9. And then we solve our equations. I'm going to add 2 to both sides of the equation. And my final result, x equals 11. Add 2 to both sides of this equation, and I get x equals -7. So my solution set is -7, comma, 11. That skipped on me. Let me rewrite that. Solution set, -7, comma, 11. And our last example, 5 equals the absolute value of 3x minus 2. Again, doesn't matter what side the absolute value sign is on, as long as it's by itself. We create our two equations, 3x minus 2, 3x minus 2, and we have 5. So we're going to have 3x minus 2 equals 5, and 3x minus 2 equals -5. Add 2. I get 3x equals 7. And to get the x by itself, we're going to divide both sides by 3. So x equals 7/3. The other equation, we're going to add 2 to both sides. And that gives us 3x equals -3 And then to get x by itself, divide both sides by 3, and x equals -1. So again, we have two solutions. The solution set -1, comma, 7/3. And leave your answers as fractions if you have fractions. And that concludes this video on absolute values.